Welcome to True Crime for Sleeping, where we share calm, immersive accounts of real cases, some solved, others still shrouded in mystery. If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, please like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Tonight we will begin with the story of Lisa Grimes. On a cool spring morning in 1981, the small town of Weatherford, Texas, awoke to the news that would quietly unsettle its steady rhythms for decades to come. At just 16 years old, Lisa Grimes had vanished without a trace. Lisa was known by many in Weatherford as a bright, spirited girl with a gentle smile that could warm the chill of an early Texas dawn. She was the eldest of 3 siblings, beloved by her family, teachers, and friends alike. Her days were filled with high school classes, choir rehearsals, and evenings spent helping her mother prepare dinner in their modest home on Elm Street. But on April 9th, Lisa's routine fractured. That day, Lisa had planned to meet a close friend at the local library after school to work on a school project. She left home just after the noon bell rang, carrying her textbooks and a small notebook filled with poetry she had begun writing late into the previous night. Her mother, Martha Grimes, watched her daughter walk down the driveway and waved from the porch, expecting her to return hours later. She never did. The first sign something was wrong came when Lisa failed to return home by early evening. At first, her family assumed she was caught up with friends or had stopped somewhere for dinner. But as the night grew darker, worry began to eclipse hope. Martha called Lisa's friends, but none had seen her since school let out. The friend she was supposed to meet at the library said Lisa never arrived. The librarian confirmed no one matching her description had entered that afternoon. By midnight, the Grimes family contacted the Weatherford Police Department to report Lisa missing. Detective Harold Marks, a seasoned investigator with 2 decades on the force, was assigned the case. He knew the weight such cases carried, not just the search for a person but the quiet devastation left behind in the waiting. Marks began with the obvious places: Lisa's school, the library, local hangouts. He interviewed classmates, teachers, and neighbors. Everyone described Lisa as kind, dependable, and not the type to wander off without telling someone. There was no hint she wanted to run away. One teacher told him she had dreams. She talked about college, about becoming a writer, yet the days slipped by with no sign of her. The town grew smaller, the shadows longer, and the mystery deepened. Neighbors remembered a strange car seen near the library that afternoon, a dark sedan that idled with no apparent purpose. Some recalled hearing a loud argument from a nearby alley around the time Lisa disappeared, but no one had come forward with solid details. Detective Marks pursued every lead with quiet persistence. Search parties combed the nearby woods and riverbanks. Flyers were posted, and the community held vigils, each gathering marked by a somber resolve to find Lisa or learn what had befallen her. But as weeks turned into months, the trail grew colder. No sightings, no calls, no clues. One haunting piece of evidence emerged a few days after the disappearance: a single page torn from Lisa's notebook, found fluttering on a bench in a small park near the library. On it was a poem, incomplete and raw, lines that seemed to speak of fear and escape, yet also of hope. Detective Marks read it over and over. "If the world closes in tight, I'll find the light in endless night." But shadows whisper truths untold, of secrets kept, of hands that hold. The meaning was elusive. Was it a cry for help, a glimpse into her state of mind, or something else entirely? As the seasons changed, the town held onto a fragile hope. Families lit candles on the anniversary of Lisa's disappearance, each flame a small beacon against the dark. Though decades have passed, the case remains open, a haunting puzzle that continues to reverberate through Weatherford's quiet streets. Lisa Grimes' fate is still unknown. Her story lingers like a whispered question carried on the Texas wind, inviting those who remember her to keep searching for truth, for closure, and for the fragile light of hope in endless night. In the weeks following Lisa Grimes' disappearance, Weatherford became a town gripped by quiet anxiety and careful vigilance. People locked their doors more tightly, watched their children more closely, and spoke in hushed tones about the girl who had vanished, as if her absence might somehow be undone by the sheer volume of concern. Detective Harold Marks found himself walking the thin line between hope and despair. Each lead, each interview, brought fragments of a story that felt incomplete, as if a puzzle were missing a crucial piece. The investigation unfolded slowly, methodically, driven less by the flash of a sudden break, and more by the steady persistence of a man unwilling to let a young life slip away unnoticed. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. A week after the torn poem was discovered in the park near the library, a local resident named Henry Caldwell called the police with information about the strange car people had seen. Henry was a retired truck driver who often spent his afternoons at the same park bench where the page had been found. "I noticed it right away," Henry told Detective Marks over the phone, voice tinged with a slow southern drawl. "That dark sedan, real shiny, parked there with the engine running but no one inside, must have been there for about 20 minutes, maybe longer." Detective Marks scheduled a meeting with Henry at the station. The old man's memory was sharp, and he described the car as a late 1970s model, black or dark blue, with tinted windows and no license plate visible. It had no markings, no bumper stickers, just an eerie presence that stood out in the otherwise quiet neighborhood. What caught Henry's attention most, though, was the man he eventually saw step out of the car. He was tall, thin, wearing a long coat and a hat pulled low over his face. Didn't look like he belonged around here, like he was trying not to be noticed. Henry's eyes darkened with unease. He walked toward the library, but I swear, he kept looking back at the car like he was nervous. Detective Marks found this lead promising but frustrating. The description was vague, and without a license plate or clear photo, tracing the vehicle or its driver proved difficult. Still, the information gave the investigation a fresh direction, a possible stranger lurking in the background of Lisa's last known movements. Meanwhile, Lisa's family struggled under the weight of uncertainty. Martha and her husband, Tom, were at the center of the storm, their grief silent but palpable. They alternated between moments of fierce hope and crushing doubt, clinging to memories of their daughter, as if those could somehow tether her back to them. Lisa's younger sister, Emily, just 11 at the time, stayed quiet mostly, but her sadness was deep and raw. She would sometimes wander into Lisa's old room, touch the shelves where her sister's books still sat untouched, and ask quietly if Lisa would ever come home. Martha often found herself awake at night, rereading Lisa's notebooks and letters. She told no one about the letters she discovered hidden beneath Lisa's mattress, small notes that hinted at anxiety, but also a strength and creativity that made her daughter shine even in the darkest moments. One letter read, "Sometimes I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something I don't understand. The world feels heavy, and yet I hold on to the thought that maybe there's a place where I can be free." These words haunted Martha. Was Lisa trying to tell them something? Was she facing something unseen, a danger or a secret she couldn't speak aloud? Detective Marks arranged a meeting with Lisa's closest friends, hoping to uncover clues hidden beneath the surface of teenage friendships. He learned that Lisa had recently become more withdrawn, sometimes avoiding phone calls or declining invitations. One friend, Sarah Jennings, recounted a troubling conversation she had with Lisa a few days before the disappearance. She said she felt like someone was watching her, like there was this shadow in the background of her life. Sarah said, voice trembling, she didn't say who or why, but she was scared. "I tried to tell her to tell someone, anyone, but she just shrugged it off like it was nothing." This revelation gave the investigation a new urgency. Was Lisa's disappearance the result of a stalking or harassment? Did she know her abductor? Detective Marks requested a forensic examination of Lisa's last known location, the library. Despite the passage of time, investigators combed the area meticulously. Dusty footprints, a cigarette butt not belonging to any staff or patrons, and faint traces of fibers on a nearby tree became pieces of a chilling jigsaw puzzle. One forensic expert concluded the fibers might have come from the sleeve of a heavy coat, similar to the one Henry Caldwell described on the man near the car. The cigarette was traced to a brand rare for the area, suggesting the stranger was not local. The investigation was gaining shape, but no solid conclusion. Then, months after Lisa vanished, a break in the case came from an unexpected place. A woman living in a neighboring town, over 60 miles away, called the Weatherford police. She claimed to have seen a girl matching Lisa's description near a gas station late one night in early May, nearly a month after the disappearance. The woman's account was chilling. She looked tired, scared. The woman said she was talking to a man in a truck, someone who didn't seem kind. I wanted to help, but didn't know how. Detective Marks sent officers to the gas station and searched the surrounding area, but they found nothing. The witness description matched previous accounts of a suspicious man, tall, thin, with a coat and hat, yet no leads on his identity. The woman's call raised the possibility that Lisa was alive and possibly being held captive. But if so, why had no one else seen her? Why had she never reached out to family or friends? The case began to weigh heavily on the entire Weatherford community. Police resources stretched thin as the investigation continued for years with no resolution. The town's newspapers occasionally ran updates, keeping the memory of Lisa alive in print, but unable to provide answers. Detective Marks never stopped working the case. He visited Lisa's family often, providing updates and lending quiet support. But as time went on, even his hope waned. The trail seemed to fade into the shadows. One chilling theory circulated among investigators: Lisa had been abducted by someone she knew, someone who had managed to stay hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. The stranger seen near the library might have been a red herring, a distraction, or someone passing through. The thought was painful but plausible. Many missing person cases reveal the darkest betrayals often come from within the trusted circle: neighbors, acquaintances, or family friends. As years passed, DNA technology advanced, offering new hope for cold cases like Lisa's. Investigators preserved every piece of evidence, every fiber, every trace, waiting for science to catch up. The poem page from the park became a symbol, both haunting and hopeful. It represented a voice silenced too soon, yet echoing faintly in the hearts of those who remembered. Lisa Grimes' story remains one of Weatherford's most painful mysteries. The search for answers continues quietly in police files, whispered in community gatherings, and carried in the hearts of a family forever changed. Her disappearance speaks not just of loss, but of the human need to understand, to hold on to hope, even when faced with silence. And so, the small Texas town waits, still watching for a light in the endless night. Years slipped by like shadows moving slowly across the landscape of Weatherford. The small town carried on with its rhythms, children growing up, seasons turning, the church bells ringing each Sunday. Yet beneath the surface, the quiet ache of Lisa Grimes' absence lingered like a persistent fog, refusing to lift. Detective Harold Marks, now nearing retirement, still kept the case alive in his mind and files. The younger officers had moved on to newer investigations, but Marks remained tethered to the mystery of Lisa's disappearance, as if letting it go would mean surrendering a piece of himself. One afternoon, nearly 5 years after Lisa vanished, the Weatherford Police Department received an anonymous package. Inside, carefully folded and sealed in a plastic sleeve, was a worn photograph, grainy, black and white, evidently taken decades earlier. The image showed a group of teenagers standing near the outskirts of town, faces mostly cheerful, but one figure caught Marks's eye immediately. There in the center was a young man wearing the same dark coat and hat described by witnesses the night Lisa disappeared. His eyes were sharp and unsettling, locked on the camera with a cold intensity. The package also contained a note, typed on plain white paper: "You're looking in the wrong direction. The answers lie beneath the surface, where no one dares to dig." Marks stared at the photograph for a long time. Who had sent it? And what did the cryptic message mean? There was no return address, no indication of identity. He showed the photo to Lisa's parents. Martha's eyes filled with tears, while Tom sat silently, fists clenched. "It looks like the man from the park," Martha whispered, voice breaking. "But how did someone have this picture all this time and never say anything?" The detective took the photo to the archives, searching for records on the young man. Through old yearbooks and town registries, he eventually identified the figure as Sam Clarkson, a local who had left Weatherford shortly after high school. Sam's name had never come up in the initial investigation. He had no criminal record, and neighbors remembered him as quiet but unremarkable. Yet something about the photograph and the note felt like a key unlocking a hidden door. Marks began digging into Sam's history. He discovered that Sam's family had fallen into hardship after his departure. His father had died in a work accident, and his mother struggled with illness. Sam had been briefly employed in a nearby city, but vanished from public records shortly after Lisa's disappearance. The detective tracked down an old acquaintance of Sam's, a man named Jerry Collins, who now ran a small mechanic shop a few towns over. "Sam? Yeah, I remember him," Jerry said slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Used to be real quiet, kept to himself mostly. Left town the day after Lisa went missing. Never really said why." Jerry's recollections painted a portrait of a man who might have carried secrets deeper than anyone knew. He wasn't the type to hurt anyone, but something was off. He seemed tense, like he was running from something. "I heard rumors. Stuff about fights, maybe some trouble with other kids, but nothing concrete." Detective Marks requested surveillance footage from nearby towns and interstate checkpoints from the time after Lisa's disappearance. Although grainy and incomplete, one blurry clip showed a man matching Sam's description driving a dark sedan similar to the one Henry Caldwell had reported. The possibility that Sam Clarkson had been involved in Lisa's disappearance grew stronger, but the case still lacked concrete proof. Around the same time, the police received a tip from a hunter who discovered a shallow grave deep in the woods several miles outside Weatherford. The area had been searched before, but this location was obscured by thick undergrowth and rarely visited. When authorities excavated the site, they found only scattered bones and fragments of clothing, nothing that could be conclusively linked to Lisa. Forensic tests later revealed the remains belonged to an unidentified adult male, unrelated to the case. The discovery, while disheartening, confirmed the dangerous nature of the area and the likelihood that secrets had been buried there, both literally and figuratively. Back in town, Lisa's disappearance continued to affect people in ways unseen by outsiders. Emily, her younger sister, had grown into a young woman haunted by the past. She carried the weight of unanswered questions like a shadow she couldn't escape. In quiet moments, Emily confided in her mother that she sometimes felt as if Lisa's spirit lingered close by, whispering warnings or cries for help. The shared grief between mother and daughter was palpable, shaping their lives in ways beyond mere loss. Detective Marks, too, felt the emotional toll. He often sat alone in his office late at night, surrounded by photographs, notes and maps, piecing together fragments of a story that refused to fully emerge. One evening, while reviewing the case files, he came across a detail previously overlooked: a series of calls made from Lisa's phone in the days before she vanished. The calls were brief, some lasting only seconds, to an unknown number. Marks requested phone company records, tracking down the mysterious number. It belonged to a prepaid phone registered in a neighboring county, with no associated name or address. With a sense of quiet urgency, Marks coordinated a search for the phone's last known location. It was traced to a run-down motel just outside the county line. The motel manager recalled a man checking in briefly around the time of Lisa's disappearance, someone matching Sam Clarkson's description. It was odd, the manager said. He paid cash, kept to himself, and left the same day. The motel room showed signs of hastened departure: a small suitcase left behind, a torn piece of paper with partial handwriting that read, "Don't trust anyone." The note, although incomplete, echoed the earlier poem found in the park. Was it a message from Lisa, or from someone else entangled in this mystery? Detective Marks felt the walls closing in. The case was no longer just about a missing girl, it was about secrets, fears, and hidden connections woven into the fabric of Weatherford. Yet, despite these tantalizing clues, the true story remained elusive. Who was the man in the dark coat? What had Lisa known, and where was she now? As the sun set over the Texas horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet town, the unanswered questions hovered like ghosts, silent but persistent. The search for Lisa Grimes was far from over. The days grew shorter as the years passed, and the weight of the Weatherford mystery settled deep into the town's collective consciousness. Lisa Grimes' disappearance had become more than a headline or a cold case file. It was a wound that refused to heal, an absence that reverberated in every corner of the community. Detective Harold Marks, despite his advancing age and dwindling energy, remained steadfast. Retirement was imminent, yet the case of Lisa Grimes clung to him like a shadow, an unspoken promise to find peace for a family left suspended in uncertainty. The new clues, Sam Clarkson's photograph, the cryptic notes, the fleeting motel trace, had breathed fresh life into the investigation, but they had also deepened the labyrinth. Each revelation seemed to fold back on itself, revealing new questions instead of answers. One crisp autumn afternoon, Marks received a call that shattered the quiet hum of his office. It was from the State Forensic Lab. "We found something," the voice on the line said. "You need to come in as soon as possible." Arriving at the lab, Marks was shown a set of remains recently uncovered by construction workers on the outskirts of Weatherford, near a long-abandoned farmhouse. The site was close to the woods where the hunter had found the unidentified male bones years before. This time, the discovery was different. The skeletal remains belonged to a young woman. The forensic team had already begun analysis, but preliminary findings suggested the victim had been there for several years within the rough time frame of Lisa's disappearance. Marks felt a cold clarity settle over him. Here, at last, was a fragment of truth. The lab confirmed the identity. A week later, the remains were those of Lisa Grimes. For her family, the news was a silent storm, grief rekindled alongside a measure of closure they had long sought. Martha and Tom traveled to the forensic facility, holding hands tightly, their faces etched with a mixture of sorrow and relief. Emily, now a young woman carrying her sister's memory like a fragile flame, stood quietly, the weight of years pressing on her shoulders. Despite the confirmation, many questions remained unanswered. How had Lisa ended up at the farmhouse? Who had been involved? And why had the truth been buried so deeply? The farmhouse itself was a place of faded stories and whispered rumors. Locals remembered it as once belonging to a recluse, a man who had vanished long ago. Some said strange noises came from the property at night. Others spoke of odd lights seen through broken windows. Detective Marks, joined by a small team, began a meticulous search of the site. They uncovered old journals, weathered and water-stained, hidden beneath floorboards. The entries were fragmented but chilling. The journals belonged to the farmhouse's former occupant, Samuel Clarkson. In his writing, a portrait emerged of a man tormented by unseen forces and inner demons. He wrote of paranoia, of shadows that followed him, and a growing dread that someone was watching. Most haunting were his last entries, where he hinted at a dark secret tied to the woods, and a girl who had come to him in fear. "I tried to protect her," one passage read, "but the darkness is too deep, too wide. I fear what is to come." Marks read the words with a heavy heart. Sam Clarkson had disappeared years ago, leaving only whispers and fragments. Was he protector or perpetrator? Madman or victim himself? Further searches around the farmhouse uncovered traces of a struggle. Broken furniture, scraps of fabric matching the clothing Lisa had been wearing. Signs that the final moments had been violent, desperate. Yet no definitive evidence pointed to another individual. The mystery became entwined with Sam's fate, unknown and unresolved. In the months following the discovery, the town gathered for a quiet memorial service. Under a sky heavy with clouds, friends, family and neighbors
stood together to honor Lisa's memory. The ceremony was simple, free of fanfare. A single wooden casket lowered into the earth, surrounded by wildflowers and soft prayers. Martha spoke with a trembling voice, her grief mingled with a fragile hope. "We may never know everything that happened to Lisa," she said. "But today, we remember her not as a missing girl, but as a daughter, a sister, a friend. She was loved, and she is not forgotten." Emily placed a worn photograph beside the grave, a picture of two sisters laughing in the sun, frozen in a moment of joy and innocence. Detective Marks watched from a distance, feeling the finality of this chapter settle like a quiet dusk. The case that had consumed years of his life was closing, but the imprint it left would endure. There were no answers to all the questions, no neat resolutions to the tangled web of fear, secrecy and sorrow. The shadows that had cloaked Weatherford and its people remained, a reminder that some mysteries resist illumination. In the silence that followed, the town moved forward, yet beneath the calm surface, the echoes of Lisa Grimes' story continued to whisper, a testament to loss, to the enduring search for truth, and to the fragile threads that bind us all.
In the quiet town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the year 1967 began like any other winter in the Appalachian foothills. The air was crisp, the sky often overcast, and the rhythms of small-town life pulsed steadily with the changing seasons. Yet beneath this calm surface, a mystery was about to unfold, one that would grip the community for decades and ripple far beyond the winding banks of the Ohio River. The story centers around a young woman named Mary Elizabeth Snyder, known to friends and family as Betty. Betty was 22, with a gentle smile and a thoughtful demeanor that made her both well-liked and quietly remarkable. She worked as a receptionist at a local medical clinic and spent her evenings volunteering at the community library. Her life was rooted deeply in the familiar patterns of Point Pleasant, yet her aspirations extended beyond its borders. She dreamed of traveling, of studying literature, and of a life filled with meaning and connection. On the evening of January 12, 1967, Betty left the clinic after a long day, bundled against the biting cold. She planned to meet a few friends for coffee, a small reprieve from the routine, a chance to share stories and laughter. Her walk home from the clinic to her modest apartment was one she had taken countless times, down streets lined with familiar houses and snow-dusted trees. But that night, Betty never made it to the cafe, and in the days and weeks that followed, she was nowhere to be found. The first sign that something was amiss came when Betty's roommate, Helen, returned from a weekend trip to find the apartment unusually quiet. Betty's coat and shoes were still by the door, her belongings untouched. Phone calls went unanswered. Concern turned to alarm as hours passed without a trace. Helen reported Betty missing to the local police, who began what would become one of the most puzzling disappearances in the region's history. Initial searches focused on the area around the clinic and Betty's usual routes. Volunteers combed the snow-covered streets, checked nearby parks, and questioned neighbors, but no sightings or clues emerged. The investigation quickly expanded to include the surrounding countryside, the banks of the Ohio River, and even the old railway tracks that ran through town. Despite thorough efforts, the trail seemed to vanish. No witnesses came forward with meaningful information. No signs of struggle or foul play were discovered. Betty's disappearance became a riddle wrapped in silence. The impact on Point Pleasant was profound. The tight-knit community, used to familiar faces and known stories, found itself facing the unknown. Parents grew more protective of their children. Friends watched each other with cautious eyes. The local newspapers chronicled the ongoing search, filling columns with appeals and updates, yet the heart of the mystery remained elusive. Betty's family, who lived in a nearby town, were devastated. They arrived in Point Pleasant to join the search, and the growing circle of worry. Her parents spoke softly in interviews, describing their daughter as kind, dependable, and careful. They could not fathom why or how she had vanished without a trace. Friends shared memories of laughter and late-night talks, holding on to hope amid mounting despair. As weeks turned into months, and months into years, Betty Snyder's case became a ghost story whispered around dinner tables and campfires, an unsolved mystery that refused to fade. The police files grew thick with reports, leads and dead ends. Theories emerged, some plausible, others more speculative. Some believed Betty had run away, seeking a fresh start far from the confines of a small town. But those who knew her well doubted this, pointing to her close bonds and plans for the future. Others feared she had been the victim of a crime, perhaps abducted or harmed by someone unknown. Yet no evidence ever supported these grim possibilities. In time, rumors began to swirl, of strange lights over the river, odd figures seen near the railway tracks, even accounts of a mysterious creature lurking in the woods. These tales fed the town's growing unease, blending fact and folklore into a tapestry of speculation. Yet none offered clarity or closure. Despite the passage of time, the question remained: what happened to Mary Elizabeth Snyder on that cold January night? Why had a young woman, with so much promise and love surrounding her, simply disappeared? The answer, it seemed, was locked away in silence, waiting in the shadows cast by the winter trees, carried on the whispering winds that swept through Point Pleasant. It was a mystery that touched the heart not just of a town, but of anyone who has ever known loss without explanation. The chill of winter lingered in Point Pleasant well into the spring of 1967, yet the hope that had initially warmed the hearts of Betty Snyder's family and friends began to cool and recede. The initial flurry of search parties, news coverage, and police attention gave way to a quiet persistence, a determined but weary effort to piece together the fragments of a puzzle with no clear edges. For the Snyder family, each day that passed without news was like a slow fracture in the soul. Betty's mother, Anne, often sat by the window of their small home in nearby Gallipolis, Ohio, gazing across the river toward Point Pleasant as if willing a sign to appear. Her hands, once steady and strong from years of working the family farm, trembled with grief and frustration. Her father, George, grew silent, burying his pain in long hours of work, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy for his younger children. But none of them could ignore the emptiness left by Betty's absence. It settled heavily in the rooms she once occupied, in the places she once walked, and in the hearts of those who loved her most. Meanwhile, in Point Pleasant, the community held a somber vigil for their missing daughter. At the medical clinic where Betty had worked, the reception desk remained conspicuously empty. Colleagues spoke in hushed tones, sharing memories of her warm laugh and quiet kindness. The library, too, felt different, less vibrant, more shadowed, without the presence of the young woman who had often lost herself among the stacks of books. Detective Raymond Coleman, the lead investigator assigned to Betty's case, was a man marked by quiet resolve. In his late 40s, with graying hair and a measured demeanor, he approached the mystery not with theatrics, but with patient diligence. His office was cluttered with files, maps and notes, a physical manifestation of the complex web he was trying to unravel. Coleman's investigation had uncovered little concrete evidence, but he refused to close the case. He pored over every detail: the time of Betty's last known sighting, the paths she might have taken, the people she had interacted with in the days leading up to her disappearance. Each name was cross-checked, each alibi scrutinized. One of the earliest questions that haunted Coleman was whether Betty's disappearance was voluntary. Had she planned to leave and start anew, or had she been taken against her will? The answer seemed both simple and impossibly complex. Her roommate, Helen, was among those questioned repeatedly. She described Betty as responsible and level-headed, not prone to impulsive decisions. She had plans, Helen said softly during one interview, plans for college, for life. She wasn't the kind to run away without a word. Yet despite Helen's conviction, the police could not rule out the possibility that Betty had left town by her own choice. A few anonymous tips suggested sightings of a young woman matching Betty's description in nearby cities, but none were ever confirmed. The investigation took a haunting turn when a local fisherman, Jim Parsons, reported finding a small weathered diary partially buried in the muddy banks of the Ohio River. The diary's pages were water-stained and fragile, but inside, among faded ink and smudged handwriting, were entries that seemed to belong to Betty. In the diary, Betty chronicled her daily life with a quiet introspection. She wrote about her hopes and fears, the comfort of routine, and a deepening sense of loneliness. One entry stood out. Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched, like there's something just beyond the edges of sight. I can't explain it, but the feeling won't go away. I'm not sure if it's real or my imagination. I wish I could talk to someone about it. The discovery of the diary added a new layer of mystery. Who or what had Betty felt watching her? Was it a shadow of anxiety common to many young women living alone, or a hint of something more sinister? Detective Coleman considered this possibility carefully. He consulted with psychologists and local historians, trying to understand the environment in which Betty had lived. Point Pleasant, while peaceful on the surface, had a history of folklore and unexplained occurrences. Stories of strange lights over the river, sudden animal deaths, and eerie sounds in the woods had been passed down for generations. At first these tales seemed irrelevant, the kind of ghost stories that small towns tell to fill quiet evenings. But when paired with Betty's words, they took on a new weight. The community's sense of unease grew. Some residents claimed to have seen a figure near the river on the night Betty disappeared, a tall shadowy silhouette that vanished when approached. Others spoke of a low humming noise heard in the distance, just beyond the range of normal sounds. No physical evidence supported these claims, but they added to the atmosphere of uncertainty and fear. As spring melted into summer, the search for Betty became less visible, but no less intense for those closest to her. The Snyder family held vigils in their home, placing candles in the windows and hoping for a sign. Friends gathered in quiet moments to share stories, each one a thread in the fabric of a life interrupted. One particularly poignant memory came from Margaret Collins, a co-worker at the clinic. She recalled a moment just days before Betty's disappearance, when the two had shared a lunch break. Betty had spoken about a man who had recently started coming to the clinic, an enigmatic figure who seemed polite but distant. Margaret remembered Betty's unease around him, a subtle tension in her voice that she had dismissed at the time. This man, identified only as Mr. X in police reports, was traced to a nearby town but had no clear connection to Betty. He disappeared soon after the investigation began, and no further leads emerged. Detective Coleman kept Mr. X's file open, suspecting that the key to Betty's disappearance might lie hidden in the shadows of these fleeting connections. Months later, a new lead came from an unexpected source. A local teenager named Tommy Evans reported seeing a car parked near the old railway tracks on the night Betty vanished. The car was described as an unfamiliar black sedan, its headlights briefly illuminating a figure walking toward the tracks. Tommy's account reignited hope and fear. Police canvassed the area, searching for tire tracks or witnesses, but found nothing definitive. The mystery deepened as the year wore on. The railway tracks, once a symbol of connection and progress, now seemed a place where time and hope had stalled. Betty's name began to appear in national missing persons databases, but the trail remained cold. The FBI offered assistance, but without evidence of abduction or crime, their involvement was limited. Yet the emotional ripples continued. The community grappled with the absence of closure, a place where grief existed without explanation. Betty's parents, though racked with pain, became advocates for missing persons, determined that no family should endure the uncertainty they faced. They joined support groups, spoke at town halls, and worked to bring attention to the silent suffering of those left behind. The question lingered: was Betty still out there somewhere beyond the familiar streets of Point Pleasant? Or had she been lost to something darker, something hidden from view? The diary, the strange sightings, the unanswered phone calls, all remained fragments of a story never fully told. In the stillness of the Appalachian evenings, the wind whispered through the trees as if carrying secrets meant only for those who dared to listen. And in the hearts of those who loved her, Mary Elizabeth Snyder remained a presence, absent but deeply felt, a mystery that time had not diminished, but had only deepened in its haunting quiet. As the seasons shifted toward the colder months of 1967, the community of Point Pleasant found itself grappling not only with the mystery of Betty Snyder's disappearance, but also with the invisible weight of fear and uncertainty that had settled over their town. Life, with all its rhythms and routines, moved forward, but beneath the surface, a quiet tension remained. Detective Raymond Coleman,
still carrying the burden of the unsolved case, began to revisit aspects of the investigation that had previously seemed peripheral. His years of experience taught him that sometimes the smallest details, overlooked or dismissed in the chaos of early searches, could later become the threads that unravel a tangled mystery. He returned to the diary found along the riverbank, poring over each entry with renewed focus. One passage, barely legible from water damage, suggested a pattern in Betty's movements, notes about her daily walks, the places she liked to stop, and her frequent visits to the old bridge spanning the Ohio River. It was a place she described as peaceful, a refuge where the rush of the water seemed to quiet her restless thoughts. In a small town like Point Pleasant, the bridge was more than infrastructure. It was a meeting place, a landmark, a symbol of connection between communities separated by the river's flow. Coleman began to consider whether the bridge might hold clues that had been missed. He enlisted the help of local volunteers to comb the area again, focusing on the banks and woods near the bridge. Days of searching yielded nothing more than driftwood and fallen branches. Yet on the third day, a volunteer named Clara Jensen, a school teacher familiar with the river's moods, found something unusual. Tucked beneath a cluster of moss-covered stones was a small tarnished locket. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman, her eyes bright, her smile gentle, and a tiny pressed flower, carefully preserved. Though the photograph was old and worn, the resemblance was striking. Clara believed it might be Betty's. The discovery reignited hope and questions. How had the locket ended up there? Could it have been lost during Betty's last known walk? Or was it something deliberately placed, a message, a marker, or a token left by someone who wanted her remembered? Detective Coleman took the locket for further examination. The metal was traced to a local jeweler, who confirmed it was a common design from the mid-1960s, often sold as sentimental keepsakes. No fingerprints or DNA could be recovered, but the photograph inside became an important piece of the puzzle, a tangible connection to the girl whose presence still haunted the town. As the investigation progressed, Coleman also revisited interviews with those closest to Betty. He spent long hours with Helen, her roommate, hoping that a fresh conversation might uncover memories hidden beneath layers of grief and time. Helen spoke softly, recalling moments that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now took on new meaning. She mentioned a man named Carl, Helen said hesitantly, but she never talked about him much. Just that he was trouble. No one on the original list of persons of interest matched the name Carl, and his identity remained a mystery. Coleman broadened his inquiry, searching for anyone connected to Point Pleasant or nearby towns who might fit the description. He reached out to other law enforcement agencies, but no reports matched the name or description. The possibility of an unknown figure in Betty's life unsettled the community. Friends and family wondered if Carl was a shadow lurking at the edges of her world, someone who might hold answers or cause further pain. Amid these uncertainties, a deeper portrait of Betty began to emerge. She was remembered as kind-hearted but quietly troubled, a young woman navigating the precarious edge between innocence and the adult world. Her diary entries revealed a mind wrestling with loneliness and a desire for connection, yet wary of trust. One entry, written just days before she vanished, read, "Sometimes I wonder if people see me for who I am, or just who they want me to be. I'm tired of pretending. Maybe it's time to find a place where I don't have to hide." This poignant note underscored the emotional complexity of her situation, a yearning to escape, to find peace, but also a vulnerability that might have left her exposed. Detective Coleman, ever aware of the human element behind the facts, shared these insights with the Snyder family. The revelation was bittersweet, an acknowledgement of Betty's inner struggles, but also a reminder that she was more than a missing person. She was a daughter, a friend, a woman with dreams and fears. The Snyder family's grief deepened with the knowledge that Betty might have been wrestling with pain no one fully understood. As autumn deepened, rumors and whispered theories swirled through Point Pleasant. Some residents suggested that Betty had run away, escaping the suffocating small-town life to start anew elsewhere. Others believed she had been the victim of foul play, perhaps at the hands of a stranger lurking in the shadows. The latter theory gained momentum, when one chilly evening, a hiker stumbled upon a shallow grave in the dense woods just outside town. The area, thick with undergrowth and fallen leaves, had been overlooked in previous searches. Police cordoned off the site and began excavation, their hopes cautiously rising. Yet what they found was not what they expected. The grave was empty, save for a few scattered bones that, after forensic analysis, were determined to be decades old, likely animal remains. The site appeared to have been disturbed multiple times, perhaps by animals or natural erosion. Though the discovery brought no answers, it reinforced the mystery's haunting nature, a search for meaning in a landscape filled with echoes but no resolution. Throughout this time, the media continued to cover Betty's story, though interest had waned from national headlines to occasional local updates. The people of Point Pleasant, however, never stopped remembering. Each year on the anniversary of Betty's disappearance, a small group gathered by the river, lighting candles and sharing memories. These gatherings were solemn acts of remembrance and defiance, affirmations that Betty's life mattered, and that the community refused to forget. Meanwhile, Detective Coleman's investigation took a personal toll. The case, unresolved and enigmatic, weighed heavily on him. He found himself visiting the bridge at night, staring into the dark waters, searching for answers beyond the facts. In quiet moments, he pondered the nature of loss, not just the loss of a person, but the loss of certainty, the loss of safety, the loss of peace. For Betty's family and friends, the ache was a constant companion. Her younger brother, David, who was only 10 when she vanished, grew up with a shadow cast over his childhood. He often asked questions no one could answer, and as he became a man, he carried a quiet determination to uncover the truth. Years later, David would return to Point Pleasant, drawn by the unresolved mystery that had shaped his life. He pored over police reports, spoke with old witnesses, and sought out those who had known his sister. His search was a testament to the enduring bonds of family and the human need for closure. But even with modern technology and renewed interest, Betty's fate remained elusive. Theories multiplied. Some spoke of accidental drowning, others of abduction, and some even entertained the idea that Betty had disappeared intentionally to escape pain and start anew. Yet none could be proven, and the silence of the river and woods held its secrets tightly. Point Pleasant itself became a place where the ordinary and the mysterious intertwined. The town's charm was tinged with the memory of loss, its quiet streets bearing witness to the fragility of life. Betty Snyder's story was no longer just about a missing woman, it was about the echoes left behind, echoes of love, grief, hope, and unanswered questions. The diary, the locket, the vague sightings, and the shadowy figure near the river all became fragments of a haunting mosaic, an incomplete portrait of a life interrupted. In the end, the mystery of Betty Snyder's disappearance was not just a case file or a news story, it was a story of humanity itself, of the delicate threads that connect us, the pain of absence, and the yearning for understanding. The river continued to flow beneath the old bridge, carrying with it whispers of a time and place where a young woman once walked, dreamed and vanished, leaving behind a silence that spoke volumes. The years that followed Betty Snyder's disappearance became a quiet chronicle of a community's endurance, a family's longing, and a detective's unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth. As the decades slipped by, Point Pleasant grew and changed. New families moved in, old buildings were replaced, and the river's steady current carried away the years like fallen leaves. Yet the story of Betty remained etched in the town's collective memory, a reminder that beneath the surface of everyday life lies a fragile web of human connection and loss. David Snyder, now a man in his 30s, returned to the town after years away, driven by a need he could no longer ignore. He had become an advocate for missing persons and unsolved cases, his sister's disappearance shaping his life's work. He met with Detective Raymond Coleman once again, the two men bound by shared grief and determination. Coleman, older now and retired, welcomed David's questions and insights. Together, they revisited every piece of evidence, the diary, the locket, witness accounts, and explored new avenues made possible by advances in forensic science. One particularly promising development came from the preservation and re-examination of Betty's diary and personal effects. Scientists attempted to extract DNA from the Lockett's case, hoping to find traces that might link to a suspect, or at least establish new connections. Though no definitive match emerged, the effort renewed hope that technology might someday bridge the gap between past and present. David also sought out the townspeople who had known Betty, recording their memories and impressions. He found a community willing to open its heart, yet still cautious of the pain that surfaced with every mention of the past. Among these voices was Clara Jensen, the teacher who had found the locket so many years ago. She shared stories of Betty's kindness and creativity, of afternoons spent reading by the river and quiet moments at the bridge. There was something about her, Clara said softly. She seemed both fragile and strong, like she carried a secret no one could see. David felt a pang of sorrow as he listened. The girl he never truly knew was becoming clearer through these fragments of memory, a mosaic of warmth, complexity, and unspoken struggles. The search for Carl, the elusive figure mentioned in Betty's diary, continued. Despite exhaustive efforts, no records surfaced that matched his identity. It was as if he existed only in shadow, a ghost who might hold the key to what happened, or simply a figment of Betty's fears. In the absence of answers, David grappled with the painful reality that some mysteries resist resolution, yet in this struggle, he found purpose. He helped establish a local foundation dedicated to supporting families of the missing and promoting awareness. The foundation held annual events by the river, where the community gathered to remember those lost and to light candles against the darkness of uncertainty. One crisp autumn evening, David stood by the old bridge with a small group of supporters. The river flowed beneath, its waters reflecting the soft glow of candlelight. As he looked across the familiar landscape, he felt the weight of decades pressing down, but also a quiet sense of connection. "We may never know everything," he said to the group, "but we carry their stories with us. We honor them by remembering, by seeking truth, and by refusing to let their lives be forgotten." The legacy of Betty Snyder became more than a tale of disappearance. It became a symbol of resilience and compassion. In Point Pleasant, the bridge stood not only as a crossing over water, but as a silent witness to a young woman's story, a story that transcended mystery to become a testament to the enduring power of hope. Detective Coleman, in his twilight years, reflected on the case that had shaped so much of his life. Though he had never solved it, he understood that some investigations are not merely about closure, but about bearing witness. He often thought of Betty, her diary, her locket, her last days, and he felt a quiet reverence for the girl who had walked the river's edge, whose absence echoed like a soft lament carried on the wind. The mystery of Betty Snyder remained unsolved, wrapped in the mists of time and memory. But in the hearts of those who loved her, she was not gone. She was a presence, gentle, haunting, and forever part of the river's endless song. And so the story ends not with answers, but with remembrance.
In the small town of Medford, Oregon, where towering evergreens brushed the sky and the fog often clung like a soft blanket to the streets, the disappearance of Lisa Bennett remains one of the quietest yet most perplexing mysteries of the late 20th century. A story that has lingered in the collective memory of the town, passed along with hushed tones, careful not to disturb the delicate peace of the community. Lisa was an ordinary woman by many accounts, well-liked, kind, a mother, a friend. Yet, her sudden vanishing in the early fall of 1982 would cast a long shadow, weaving uncertainty into the fabric of Medford's daily life. This is a story not of violent spectacle, but of a slow unraveling, a fading away that left no trace but a haunting question that has never been answered. Lisa Mae Bennett was born in 1954 and raised in Medford. She was known for her gentle demeanor, a school teacher at the local middle school who nurtured a love of literature and history in her students. Her home sat on a quiet street, lined with maple trees, a modest house with a garden that bloomed in summer with lavender and daisies. Her life followed a rhythm, morning coffee on the porch, a day at school, afternoons spent with her son Ryan, and evenings reading by the fireplace. She had divorced her husband 2 years before, a calm but painful separation that left her focused on her son and her teaching. On the morning of September 23, 1982, Lisa kissed Ryan goodbye as he boarded the school bus. She had planned to spend the day grading papers and preparing lessons. She told her sister Janet that she intended to visit the library after lunch to gather resources for a new history project. That afternoon, Lisa left her house around 1:30 p.m., wearing a soft blue sweater and comfortable jeans. She carried a small leather satchel with her notes and a paperback book. She told Janet she would return by 5 p.m. to prepare dinner. That evening, when Lisa did not return, Janet grew concerned. She tried calling her sister's home phone, but only reached silence. Ryan said his mother hadn't come home yet. The hours slipped by. Finally, Janet called the police to report Lisa missing. The initial search was careful but thorough. Medford was a town where everyone knew everyone else. Neighbors offered assistance, organizing small groups to comb through parks, wooded areas, and along the riverbanks. The police conducted door-to-door checks, but no one had seen Lisa since that afternoon. The library confirmed she never arrived that day. Her purse, wallet, and keys remained at home. Her car, a dusty blue Volvo, was parked in the driveway. Nothing was missing from the house, no signs of forced entry or struggle. Her son had no idea where she could be. Detective Harold Kemp was assigned the case. A methodical man in his late 40s, known for his quiet patience, he approached the investigation with a steady hand. In his experience, disappearances were rarely as simple as they seemed. People left for many reasons: fear, desperation, escape, but always something left a trace. In Lisa's case, the trail was cold. The detective's first step was to revisit the last known moments of Lisa's day. He interviewed the librarian, who remembered Lisa calling that morning to inquire about specific books on early American history. There was no record of her entering the building that day. Neighbors reported seeing her leave the house, walking down the street, but none saw where she went after that. Harold began to canvass the local shops and cafes along the route from Lisa's house to the library. No one recalled seeing her that afternoon. One lead came from an elderly man named Mr. Thompson, who lived a few blocks from Lisa's home. He mentioned hearing a woman's voice raised in anger around 3 p.m. near the edge of town, by an abandoned sawmill site. It was a place few went, often shrouded in mist and shadow. No one else could confirm the sound or recognize the voice. The sawmill had been closed for years, left to rot under the encroaching forest. It was a spot children avoided, a relic of a more industrial time. The police searched the sawmill grounds the next day. The site was tangled with underbrush, fallen beams, and rusty machinery. No signs of struggle or recent activity were found. The silence was oppressive, the air thick with the scent of moss and decay. Detective Kemp returned several times over the weeks, each visit bringing only more questions. The area seemed untouched, as though no one had been there for years. A month passed. Ryan was taken in by his Aunt Janet, who tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. The school community mourned quietly. Flyers were posted, news reports aired briefly, but the story faded from headlines. Yet for those close to Lisa, the absence was unbearable. Detective Kemp kept the case open, a file growing thick with reports, interviews and theories. One afternoon, a strange call came from a woman who claimed to have seen Lisa driving south on Highway 99 the day after she disappeared. The caller said Lisa's car passed her slowly, the woman behind the wheel looking distracted, almost frightened. But when police checked traffic cameras, there was no record of the Volvo on that route. Another strange detail emerged from a private investigator hired by Janet. He uncovered that Lisa had recently been in contact with a man named Richard Caldwell, someone her family barely knew. Caldwell had a past tied to the town's underbelly, small-time criminal records, debts, and a reputation for trouble. What connection could Lisa have had with him? Was it a coincidence or a link to her disappearance? No definitive answers followed. Caldwell denied any contact with Lisa. He claimed he had not seen her for months and had no reason to hurt her. The police found no evidence to implicate him. As years passed, theories about Lisa's fate multiplied. Some whispered she had chosen to vanish, starting anew elsewhere. Others feared foul play, perhaps linked to an unknown conflict or danger she had not shared. No body was ever found. No trace of Lisa beyond that day in September 1982. The mystery of Lisa Bennett remained a quiet wound in Medford's history, an unresolved question, a story without closure. Detective Kemp, now retired, often said he wished there had been more clues, more chance for answers. But sometimes, he reflected, the human story doesn't unfold neatly. Some lives drift out of reach, leaving only memories and a persistent haunting silence. The months following Lisa Bennett's disappearance settled into a slow, grinding rhythm of quiet investigation and relentless hope. For those who knew her, especially her young son Ryan and sister Janet, each day without news was an echoing absence, a hollow space where certainty once lived. Yet beneath the grief, a persistent urge to understand what had happened to Lisa took root, driving the search forward, even as the trail grew colder. Detective Harold Kemp had taken the case with a steady, methodical determination. A veteran of the Medford Police Department, Kemp was no stranger to disappearances, but Lisa's case carried a weight of subtle complexity that made it feel different. It was not a scene of overt violence or an immediate suspect. Instead, it was a quiet vanishing, a puzzle with missing pieces that refused to fit. In the weeks after Lisa was reported missing, the initial search efforts had focused on the local area, nearby forests, the winding back roads where she might have wandered, and the stretches along Highway 99 where she was last seen. Search parties of volunteers and police combed fields and wooded areas, calling her name into the cool air. But as days turned into weeks, these efforts yielded no trace. The local media, initially attentive, began to lose focus as other stories took precedence. Still, those close to Lisa refused to let the story slip away. Janet Bennett, her older sister by 5 years, took it upon herself to organize community outreach, passing out flyers, speaking on local radio shows, and coordinating with missing person organizations. She became a quiet pillar of strength, though the strain showed in the lines around her eyes and the way her voice sometimes faltered in the middle of conversations. Lisa's son, Ryan, then 11 years old, was too young to fully grasp the magnitude of what had happened, but old enough to feel the sting of absence. His days were filled with unanswered questions. Where was his mother? Would she come home? These questions haunted him, quietly echoed in his classroom, in the corners of his mind when he tried to sleep. Ryan's father had left years before, and with Lisa gone, the boy was placed under Janet's care. For Janet, it was a bittersweet responsibility. She loved Ryan dearly, but knew this was a role thrust upon her under tragic circumstances. Detective Kemp continued his investigation, methodically piecing together what little evidence there was. Lisa's last confirmed sighting was the evening of February 10, 1983, near her home. The witness accounts were few but consistent. A woman matching Lisa's description was seen walking down Oak Street shortly after 8 p.m., alone, wearing a blue sweater and jeans. A key point of interest was a phone call received by Lisa's employer at the local bookstore on the evening she disappeared. The caller was a man, speaking briefly but insisting that Lisa was needed urgently at a location near the town's industrial district. Lisa had left the store shortly afterward, according to co-workers, but never returned. Despite tracing the call, police could find no record of a man fitting the caller's description. Phone records at the time were limited, and the technology to track such calls was rudimentary. The call was a tantalizing thread, yet frustratingly elusive. Lisa's personal life appeared stable on the surface. She worked part-time at the bookstore, a job she cherished for the quiet and the community of readers it brought her into contact with. She was known for her gentle nature, often staying late to help customers find just the right book. Yet beneath the calm exterior, those closest to Lisa hinted at struggles unseen by the casual observer. Janet spoke quietly of Lisa's recent withdrawal, her tendency to avoid certain people and places she once frequented. There was talk of a man she had been dating briefly, a relationship that had ended abruptly and under unclear circumstances. Janet's conversations with Lisa's friends revealed little else concrete.
Some suggested Lisa had been increasingly anxious in the weeks before her disappearance, a stark contrast to the woman they knew who had once been so full of laughter. As spring turned to summer, the investigation expanded. Detective Kemp reached out to neighboring towns and state police, hoping to uncover any connections or sightings. In April, a new lead surfaced from a woman named Marlene Jacobs, who claimed to have seen someone matching Lisa's description at a roadside diner near Grants Pass, approximately 70 miles southwest of Medford. Marlene's account was cautious and filled with uncertainty, but she described the woman as appearing tired, distracted, and looking over her shoulder nervously. This sighting occurred on a rainy evening in late March, weeks after Lisa had vanished. The police followed up, though the trail quickly went cold. The diner was busy that night, and no other patrons recalled the woman. There were no photographs or records, and without further evidence, the sighting remained an unconfirmed possibility. For Janet and Ryan, Marlene's story was both a spark of hope and a fresh wound. It suggested that Lisa might have been alive and moving, but also that she was fearful, isolated. Months passed. The search for Lisa Bennett became part of the town's quiet narrative, an unsolved mystery, whispered among neighbors, a photograph pinned on bulletin boards, a face seen in dreams. Detective Kemp continued his work with a steady resolve. He revisited the details again and again, interviewing old witnesses, reviewing the evidence. There was a growing suspicion that Lisa's disappearance was tied to someone she knew, someone who had managed to evade detection. Behind the scenes, police discovered that Lisa had been attempting to cut ties with an abusive ex-boyfriend, a man named Harold Price. Price had a known history of violence, and had been harassing Lisa in the months before her disappearance. There were police reports, restraining orders filed, and at least one confrontation witnessed by neighbors. Price was questioned extensively, but he had an alibi supported by friends and co-workers. Still, Kemp was not convinced. Price's behavior, as described by those who knew him, was volatile and threatening. In a small town like Medford, where everyone knew each other's histories and reputations, the shadows cast by Harold Price were long. Kemp believed that Price held a key to the mystery, but without evidence, he was unable to press charges. The investigation reached a frustrating standstill. Meanwhile, life carried on for Ryan and Janet, the quiet hope for Lisa's return mingling with the slow, steady acceptance of her absence. Ryan, growing older and more aware, sometimes asked questions that no one could answer. Janet held him close during these moments, promising that they would keep looking, keep hoping. The town of Medford itself seemed to hold its breath, caught between the familiar rhythms of daily life and the lingering ache of a mystery unsolved. This part of the story closes on a quiet, haunting note. Lisa Bennett's disappearance remained a puzzle, shaped by fleeting glimpses and half-remembered shadows. The investigation was far from over, yet the truth remained just out of reach, wrapped in the fog that settled over the town's darkened streets. The months after the initial investigation blurred into a haze of uncertainty and frustration. Detective Harold Kemp continued his quiet but determined work, understanding that in cases like Lisa Bennett's, time was a fragile enemy. The trail was cold, the clues scarce, yet Kemp refused to let the case fade into the shadows. Spring gave way to summer in Medford, Oregon, and with the changing seasons, the town's life pulsed onward, indifferent to the lingering absence of one of its own. The streets filled with the hum of everyday routines, children's laughter, and the gentle creak of porch swings in the evening breeze. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, the unresolved disappearance clung tightly to the community's collective consciousness. Janet Bennett, now the primary guardian for her nephew Ryan, balanced her quiet grief with fierce determination. She continued organizing local efforts, community meetings, search parties and media outreach, hoping to keep Lisa's story alive in the public eye. But the longer Lisa remained missing, the thinner the threads of hope grew. Detective Kemp, methodical and reflective, revisited the small but vital details of Lisa's life and disappearance. He spent long evenings poring over reports, re-interviewing witnesses, and quietly investigating leads that came and went like shadows. One such lead emerged from a seemingly unremarkable source, an anonymous letter sent to the Medford Police Department in late May, 4 months after Lisa vanished. The letter was brief, typewritten, and unsigned. It claimed knowledge of Lisa's whereabouts, offering cryptic hints that she was alive but trapped, somewhere hidden where the forest meets the river. Though vague, the letter sparked a new wave of hope and renewed urgency in the investigation. Kemp carefully organized a search focused on the area described a stretch along the Rogue River, where dense forests gave way to rocky banks and tangled undergrowth. Local volunteers joined the effort, combing the river banks and woods, their calls to Lisa echoing faintly amid the rustling leaves. Despite days of searching, the results were disappointing. No sign of Lisa emerged. The anonymous tip, while intriguing, proved to be yet another dead end. The letter remained a mystery. Kemp analyzed the typewriter font and paper quality, but the technology was common enough that it provided no significant leads. Whoever sent the letter had been cautious, deliberately vague and impossible to trace. The unanswered questions gnawed at Kemp's mind. Was the letter a cruel hoax? Or was it a message from someone close to Lisa, someone who could not come forward openly? Meanwhile, Ryan, now 12, was struggling to understand the silence surrounding his mother's absence. He moved through the days with a quiet resilience, yet the weight of loss was ever present. Janet found herself balancing her role as both guardian and comforter, answering questions she wished she did not have to face. At night, Ryan sometimes whispered her name in his sleep, haunted by dreams where Lisa's face was blurred or fading away. Back at the police station, Kemp's investigation uncovered unsettling new details about Harold Price, Lisa's ex-boyfriend. Though his alibi seemed solid on paper, some inconsistencies began to surface. Several co-workers, who had initially supported Price's story, quietly retracted their statements, citing fear of retaliation. A pattern of intimidation and aggression around Price became more evident as Kemp followed this thread. Kemp arranged to speak again with Harold Price, this time with a more guarded approach. The interview took place in the subdued lighting of the interrogation room, far from the eyes of the public. Price appeared calm but guarded, his demeanor shifting subtly as questions touched on the night of Lisa's disappearance. He denied involvement, but offered little explanation for the harassment Lisa had reported. Though lacking direct evidence, Kemp sensed the dark undercurrent beneath Price's words. The detective also uncovered a history of violence linked to Price that extended beyond Lisa. Previous partners and acquaintances had suffered threats and harm. Despite the mounting suspicion, the lack of forensic evidence or witnesses tying Price directly to Lisa's disappearance made prosecution impossible. The case remained tangled in a frustrating limbo. In the meantime, the town's atmosphere began to shift. Local gossip churned with theories and speculation. Some whispered that Lisa had left voluntarily, escaping a life of fear. Others suspected foul play, though the absence of clear suspects left the story open-ended. This uncertainty affected the community's collective spirit. Medford, once a quiet town where doors were rarely locked and neighbors watched out for one another, felt a subtle unease settle beneath its surface. Amid the shadows of uncertainty, Detective Kemp found a new lead through forensic technology that had advanced since Lisa's disappearance. Small traces found near the phone booth, where Lisa was last known to be seen, a strand of hair, a faint footprint, were re-examined. Using newly available DNA testing methods, investigators hoped to find matches in national databases. Weeks later, the forensic team reported back. The hair did not belong to Lisa or any known associates, but instead matched a profile connected to a convicted felon, recently released from prison and living in a nearby county. This discovery reopened a fresh chapter in the case, suggesting a potential link to a dangerous individual with a history of violence and evasion. Kemp, cautious but hopeful, began coordinating with other law enforcement agencies to locate and interview this new person of interest. The investigation took on a renewed sense of urgency and focus. Yet, even as leads emerged, the elusive nature of Lisa's disappearance remained. No new physical evidence was found, and no witnesses came forward with decisive information. For Janet and Ryan, the months were a slow march through hope and despair. Ryan's questions grew more pressing, and Janet struggled to maintain a fragile balance between protecting him and keeping the memory of Lisa alive. On quiet evenings, Janet would sit by the fireplace, photo albums spread across the table, tracing the outline of Lisa's smile with trembling fingers. The woman she loved was still out there somewhere, or so she told herself. In the town of Medford, life carried on, marked by the unspoken pain of an unresolved loss. The search for Lisa Bennett became a quiet symbol of resilience and heartache, a reminder that sometimes, the most chilling mysteries are those that refuse to be solved. The quiet passage of another year in Medford was marked not by resolution, but by the persistent absence of answers. Lisa Bennett's disappearance had settled into the collective memory of the town, a wound neither fully healed nor forgotten. Her name echoed softly in conversations, prayers, and in the silent moments when those who loved her found themselves alone with their thoughts. Detective Harold Kemp had long since moved past the frustration that had once defined his approach. His work was no longer about chasing leads that vanished like smoke, but about honoring the life that had been interrupted and the family still living with uncertainty. The newly discovered DNA connection to a convicted felon named Marcus Trent had offered a brief flicker of hope, though it had not yet yielded conclusive results. Trent was known to have been in the region around the time Lisa disappeared. His record showed a pattern of violence and evasion, a man who skirted the edges of the law and society. Yet, when authorities questioned Trent, he denied any knowledge of Lisa Bennett or involvement in her disappearance. His alibi was shaky but unrefuted by witnesses. The investigation into his possible connection became a slow, painstaking effort to piece together his movements and associations. Despite intense scrutiny, Trent remained an enigma, neither definitively cleared nor conclusively tied to the case. The absence of physical evidence was a relentless obstacle. Kemp understood that the trail might never lead to a courtroom or a confession. Instead, it became a matter of persistence and patience, of searching for the faintest glimmers of truth in a sea of silence. Meanwhile, the impact on Lisa's family deepened with the passing years. Janet Bennett, now aged and marked by grief, maintained her vigil with unwavering resolve. Her role as guardian to Ryan, who was growing into a young man, evolved with the seasons. Ryan, once a boy haunted by dreams and unanswered questions, was beginning to carve his own path. The absence of his mother shaped him in ways he struggled to articulate, a silent companion on his journey through adolescence and beyond. Janet's days were filled with small routines, tending to the garden Lisa had once loved, attending support groups for families of missing persons, and writing letters that she never sent, messages to Lisa addressed to the unknown, filled with hope, apology, and love. Her home remained a shrine to memory. Photographs adorned every room. Mementos of Lisa's life were carefully preserved. There was a quiet dignity in Janet's steadfast commitment to remembrance, an acknowledgement that healing sometimes meant holding space for loss without expectation. In the community, Lisa's disappearance had become a quiet catalyst for change. Awareness of missing persons cases grew, and local authorities improved protocols for investigation and response. Medford itself took on a cautious vigilance, a shared understanding of fragility beneath the town's calm surface. Yet the mystery of Lisa Bennett lingered, a silent question mark that no amount of time seemed able to erase. Detective Kemp, who had devoted years to the case, eventually retired with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. He had come to see Lisa not just as a case file, but as a young woman, with hopes, fears, and a life unjustly interrupted. His final report reflected the complexity and uncertainty that defined the investigation. It acknowledged the pain of the unknown and the resilience of those left behind. The last known piece of concrete evidence, the anonymous letter that had once revived hope, remained an unsolved puzzle. Its origin, purpose, and truthfulness were never uncovered. It was a ghost in the story, as intangible as the answers that had slipped beyond reach. The forest where the letter had said Lisa might be hidden had been searched thoroughly, yet nature reclaimed its secrets. The river's gentle flow masked the years as it carried memories downstream, away from human understanding. Psychologically, the community wrestled with the ambiguity of closure. The absence of definitive answers fostered a landscape of what-ifs and maybes. For families of the missing, the lack of resolution was a unique form of grief, a void without the possibility of farewell or finality. Counselors and support networks emerged to address this liminal space of loss, recognizing that healing often required patience, compassion, and a willingness to live with uncertainty. For Ryan, the journey was deeply personal. He grappled with identity, legacy, and the shadow cast by a mother he barely remembered but deeply missed. His adolescence was punctuated by moments of quiet reflection, as he tried to piece together fragments of Lisa's life from stories and photographs. At times, he wrestled with anger, frustration, and a yearning for understanding. Other times, he embraced hope, the hope that someday answers might emerge from the silence. One summer evening, years after Lisa's disappearance, Ryan stood by the same riverbank where his mother had last been seen. The water flowed steadily beneath the fading light, carrying with it the memories of a life interrupted. He closed his eyes and whispered a name, Lisa, into the wind. It was a moment of connection, fragile and profound, between the known and the unknown, the past and the present. The case of Lisa Bennett remained unsolved, an enduring mystery that resisted explanation. But in the hearts of those who loved her, she remained vivid and alive, not merely a missing person, but a daughter, a sister, a mother, a woman whose absence was felt deeply. The story of her disappearance was a quiet testament to the complexity of loss, the persistence of hope, and the enduring need for justice and truth. Detective Kemp's last words in his final report captured this sentiment best. Sometimes, the greatest mysteries are not those that can be solved with evidence alone, but those that dwell in the hearts of people left waiting, hoping, and remembering. Lisa Bennett's story is one of such mysteries, a reminder that even in silence love endures. And so the town of Medford lived on, carrying the memory of Lisa Bennett as a solemn shadow beneath the calm exterior. The forest whispered her name in the rustling leaves, the river carried her story in its endless flow, and those who knew her held space for a truth that had yet to be revealed. The disappearance of Lisa Bennett was never closed, never forgotten. It remains a haunting chapter in the town's history, a quiet, chilling mystery that lingers in the spaces between known and unknown, presence and absence, hope and despair.
In the early spring of 1987, a quiet town nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains became the backdrop for a disappearance that would puzzle investigators and haunt the community for decades. The town of Elmswood, West Virginia, was a place where the rhythms of daily life moved slowly, where neighbors knew each other by name, and the forest stretched out in every direction like a protective cloak. It was in this seemingly peaceful setting that Emily Harper vanished without a trace. Emily was 22 years old, a recent graduate from a local college, and had returned to Elmswood for a brief visit before starting a new job in Charleston. She was known for her gentle nature, her quick smile, and a deep love for the wilderness that surrounded the town. Hiking and photography were her passions, and she often spent hours wandering the wooded trails that wound through the hills. On a crisp morning in March, Emily told her mother she planned to take one last walk through her favorite forest path near the old logging road. It was a route she had traveled many times before, a place that brought her comfort and clarity. She promised to be back by noon for lunch, but Emily never returned. The initial response was calm but urgent. Her family reported her missing that afternoon when she failed to come home, and the small-town police organized a search party. Volunteers, friends and neighbors scoured the forest with flashlights and voices calling out her name. The terrain was rugged. Thick woods, steep slopes and hidden ravines made the search difficult. Days stretched into a week with no sign of Emily. Her backpack and camera were never found. Her footprints disappeared abruptly near a shallow creek, as if she had vanished into thin air. As the days passed, the atmosphere in Elmswood shifted from hopeful to somber. The local sheriff, John Matthews, a man respected for his steady hand and empathy, took charge of the investigation. He knew the forest like the back of his hand and had led many searches before, but this was different. The absence of any clue was unnerving. Sheriff Matthews called in specialists from the state police, canine units, and aerial reconnaissance teams. Every inch of the forest was mapped and combed, but the wilderness kept its secrets tightly held. The media soon picked up the story. Photographs of Emily appeared on news broadcasts and newspapers, her face a quiet plea for answers, but despite the attention, no new leads emerged. There were whispers, rumors of strangers seen near the logging road, tales of old family feuds, and speculation about Emily's possible involvement with someone dangerous. None of these were confirmed. The sheriff dismissed the gossip, focusing on facts, no matter how few. Emily's family struggled with the void left in their lives. Her mother, Grace Harper, was a woman worn thin by worry but resolute in her belief that Emily was still alive somewhere. Her younger brother, Michael, barely a teenager, held on to the hope that his sister would return. They clung to memories, the sound of Emily's laughter, the way she would curl up with a book by the fireplace, her sketches of wildflowers pressed in journals. Psychologists and grief counselors who worked with the family noted the unique anguish caused by ambiguous loss, the pain of not knowing, of having no body, no closure. This kind of grief was a slow creeping shadow, leaving its mark in quiet ways. Neighbors and friends organized vigils, lighting candles in the town square, their flickering flames a symbol of collective hope and shared sorrow. Despite the relentless search efforts, Emily Harper's disappearance remained an open wound. Years passed with no answers. The forest reclaimed the paths where she had walked. New generations grew up hearing her story as a cautionary tale, a mystery that was woven into the fabric of the town's identity. Unexplained details haunted the case. A diary Emily kept revealed a recent tension in her life, a sense of being watched, a mention of a man who had approached her while hiking. The entries were vague, lacking names but suggested a growing fear. Sheriff Matthews, even after retirement, held on to the hope that technology or a new witness might one day bring clarity. The disappearance of Emily Harper remains unsolved. Her story is a reminder of the fragility of life, the enduring pain of loss, and the complex ways mystery can settle over a place and its people. The weeks following Emily Harper's disappearance were marked by an uneasy silence in Elmswood. The forest that had once been a sanctuary for the young woman now felt like a vast, impenetrable labyrinth, swallowing questions as easily as it swallowed footsteps. Sheriff John Matthews and his team were relentless, combing through every detail, every lead, no matter how small. They spoke with Emily's closest friends, classmates from the college she had recently graduated, and even casual acquaintances she had met during her hikes. But the answers were frustratingly sparse. One of the earliest interviews was with Clara Benson, Emily's closest friend since childhood. Clara described Emily as both cautious and curious, a combination that made the disappearance all the more perplexing. She was careful about who she trusted, Clara recalled softly during a recorded interview, but she wasn't afraid of the woods. That was her escape, her place to breathe. If she felt threatened, she would have told me. Clara's voice trembled slightly as she shared memories of their last conversations, vague but tinged with a growing sense of unease. Emily had mentioned feeling watched, as though someone was following her on her hikes, though she never said who or why. That sensation of being watched became one of the few tangible threads the investigators could grasp. Sheriff Matthews ordered a review of local reports in the weeks before Emily's disappearance. They found several unrelated accounts of suspicious vehicles and unfamiliar men seen near the logging road and trails, but none that directly linked to Emily. Still, the pattern suggested a stranger, or perhaps more than one, lurking in the woods, raising questions that gnawed at the edges of the investigation. In the days after Emily vanished, an unexpected piece of evidence surfaced. A local man named Henry Cole came forward with a report. Henry was an amateur naturalist who often ventured into the forest to document bird species. He claimed that on the morning of Emily's disappearance, he had spotted a figure near the creek where her footprints ended. "I wasn't sure at the time," Henry said, "but it looked like a woman. She was wearing a dark jacket, and she seemed to be standing very still, almost as if she was waiting for someone." Henry's description matched Emily's general appearance and clothing style, but it was inconclusive. The investigators sent search teams back to the creek, hoping to find any trace that Henry's sighting might lead them to. The area was difficult to access, bordered by steep embankments and dense undergrowth. Forensic teams scoured the creek bed and surrounding forest floor but came up empty. No personal items, no footprints besides Emily's, and no signs of a struggle. Over the following months, the investigation grew more complex. Psychological profiles were developed to try to understand what might have happened. Experts weighed in on the possibility of voluntary disappearance versus foul play. The idea that Emily might have left on her own was examined carefully, but was increasingly unlikely given the lack of communication and personal effects left behind. Those closest to her doubted she would vanish without telling someone, especially her family. One chilling aspect of the case was the absence of any ransom note or communication if an abduction had occurred. There was no demand, no claim of responsibility. The silence was deafening. Detectives theorized that if Emily had encountered someone with harmful intent, it might have been a sudden opportunistic act, a terrifying moment in the wilderness that left no witnesses. The community struggled with conflicting emotions. There was fear, the fear that a predator was near, watching from the shadows. But there was also guilt and frustration. Many in Elmswood wondered if more could have been done, if warnings had been missed, or if someone had seen something and remained silent. Meanwhile, the Harper family's pain deepened. Grace Harper spoke publicly for the first time at a local gathering months after Emily disappeared. She addressed the crowd with a voice both firm and fragile. "We need to remember Emily as she was full of light, love and hope," she said. "But we also need answers. Our family cannot live in this silence." Grace's words resonated, stirring a renewed sense of purpose in the community. In the months that followed, a grassroots search effort took shape. Volunteers organized through local churches, schools and neighborhood groups to conduct regular forest walks, hoping that a fresh set of eyes might find something others missed. They carried photos of Emily, maps of the trails, and an unspoken hope that their efforts would break the long silence. One of these searchers was Michael Harper, Emily's younger brother. At 15 years old, he was still grappling with the confusion of loss and the weight of hope. Michael described his sister in interviews as a protective older sibling who had always looked out for him, encouraging his interests in music and drawing. Losing her had left an emptiness he found hard to explain. But he joined the search parties with quiet determination, walking the woods and trying to imagine the last moments she spent there. The psychological toll on the family was immense. Counselors working with the Harpers spoke of ambiguous loss, the peculiar torment of grieving someone who might still be alive but unreachable. It was a grief without closure, marked by uncertainty and frozen in time. Grace Harper struggled with sleepless nights, haunted by dreams where Emily called out to her from the forest. As the investigation progressed, new technology offered a glimmer of hope. Advances in forensic science allowed investigators to re-examine evidence from the early search. Soil samples, fibers, and other minor traces were tested with modern methods, though no breakthroughs emerged. There was a sense of waiting, of watching for something, a call, a discovery, a sign. The local sheriff's office maintained a hotline, encouraging anyone with information, no matter how small, to come forward. Anonymous tips trickled in over the years. Some were promising but unverifiable, others led to dead ends. Among these was a note about a man seen near the logging road who reportedly fled when approached. The man's identity was never confirmed, and he disappeared from the town shortly after Emily vanished. Despite the mystery, Emily's story became a cautionary tale that shaped the community's relationship with the forest. Parents warned their children to avoid the trails alone. Hikers traveled in groups, always mindful of their surroundings. The forest, once a place of peace, took on a different meaning, one tinged with vigilance and unease. Decades later, the disappearance of Emily Harper remains unsolved, a quiet wound in Elmswood's history. Sheriff Matthews, now retired, often reflects on the case. He still visits the forest paths, hoping for closure that never came. He speaks of Emily with respect and sorrow, remembering a young woman who loved the woods and whose absence left the town changed forever. The silence around Emily Harper is a reminder of the limits of human understanding, how nature can conceal secrets, how a single moment can ripple outward, and how loss can linger without answers. Her story lives on in the hearts of those who knew her, and in the shadowed trails where she was last seen. As the seasons turned again in Elmswood, the hope that had quietly endured in the hearts of Emily Harper's family and friends began to show signs of strain. Winter had melted into spring, and yet the forest remained silent. No new clues had emerged, and the unanswered questions hung heavy in the air like a thick fog. Sheriff John Matthews, who had devoted countless hours to the case, now found himself returning repeatedly to the very forest where Emily had last been seen. The trees, towering and still, seemed to guard their secrets jealously, indifferent to the desperate search for truth. In early April, nearly 6 months after Emily vanished, a break in the case came unexpectedly. A local hunter, Alan Prescott, was exploring a remote section of the forest several miles from the logging road, an area rarely frequented by hikers or residents. Alan had been tracking deer for a wildlife study and had stumbled upon a small clearing near the base of a steep ravine. There, half buried beneath a tangle of branches and moss, he found something disturbing, a worn leather backpack soaked through and covered in dirt. Alan called the sheriff's office immediately, and a team was dispatched to the site. The backpack was carefully recovered and examined by forensic experts. Inside, they found several items that raised alarms: a few personal belongings, including a water bottle with initials matching Emily's handwriting, a torn scrap of fabric that matched the jacket she was last seen wearing, and most chillingly, a small notebook filled with hurried, almost illegible entries. The notebook became a focal point of renewed investigation. Handwriting analysts confirmed the journal belonged to Emily Harper. The entries painted a fragmented picture of increasing fear and anxiety. One passage read, "I can't shake the feeling that someone is following me. I hear footsteps when no one should be near. I don't know who it is, but I'm scared. I'm trying to stay calm, but it's getting harder. The forest doesn't feel safe anymore." Other pages detailed strange encounters on the trails, glimpses of a shadowy figure, strange noises in the night, and an unshakable sense of being watched. The handwriting grew more erratic as the entries progressed, as if the writer was writing under duress or fear. Sheriff Matthews found the journal both heartbreaking and crucial. It suggested Emily had been aware of a threat, that her disappearance was preceded by terror, not accident. With this new evidence, investigators expanded their search area, focusing on locations referenced in the notebook. The most perplexing aspect was the sudden end of the journal's entries. The last note, dated just 2 days before her disappearance, was chilling in its brevity. "I don't know how much longer I can hide. If anyone finds this, please help." This final plea brought a renewed urgency to the case. Volunteers, law enforcement, and search and rescue teams scoured the forest with fresh determination. They deployed thermal imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and K9 units to locate any trace of Emily. Yet, despite their efforts, the forest remained silent. The community of Elmswood watched the developments with bated breath. Local media covered the discovery extensively, and the story gained traction beyond the small town, sparking discussions about forest safety and the potential dangers lurking in wilderness areas. One of the most haunting questions was whether Emily had encountered someone, or something dangerous, or if her disappearance was the result of an accident amplified by fear. Experts consulted for the case debated scenarios: a calculated abduction, a chance encounter with a violent stranger, or the possibility of a fugitive living off the grid. As speculation mounted, attention turned to the shadows of Elmswood's past. Years before,
The forest had been the site of other mysterious disappearances and unexplained incidents, none of which had been solved. Elder residents recalled tales of strange lights, eerie sounds, and unmarked graves rumored to lie deep in the woods. This history only deepened the mystery surrounding Emily's case. Some residents whispered about a curse or restless spirits haunting the forest, while others dismissed such ideas as superstition. Sheriff Matthews maintained a grounded approach, focusing on facts and evidence, though even he admitted the case challenged his understanding. Meanwhile, the Harper family found themselves thrust once again into the harsh spotlight of public attention. Grace Harper, already weakened by grief, struggled to maintain her composure amid media interviews and community gatherings. She continued to advocate for awareness and safety, hoping her daughter's story would prevent other tragedies. Michael Harper, now a teenager, became more withdrawn. His once vibrant spirit was dulled by the relentless absence of answers. Yet, he refused to give up hope. In quiet moments, he would wander the edges of the forest, carrying Emily's worn backpack as a reminder of the sister he longed to find. Psychologists working with the family emphasized the importance of community support and ongoing counseling. They spoke of the trauma of ambiguous loss, how living with uncertainty affects mental health and relationships. Friends and neighbors organized fundraisers and vigils, offering what comfort they could. In the midst of the ongoing search, a volunteer named Rachel Mills made a discovery that reignited both hope and fear. While walking a lesser-known trail, Rachel noticed a cluster of disturbed earth near a shallow stream. With permission from authorities, a small excavation was conducted. What they found was unsettling. Beneath a thin layer of soil lay several broken pieces of a necklace, the kind Emily was known to wear. Nearby, there was also a fragment of fabric matching the torn scrap found in the backpack. Forensic teams carefully collected the evidence, hopeful it might reveal more. The significance of the find was debated. Some believed it indicated Emily had passed through the area, possibly struggling to escape or hiding. Others feared it might be a sign of something darker, that the area was the scene of a violent encounter. Sheriff Matthews ordered an intensified search of the ravine and surrounding forest floor. Teams mapped out a grid, scanning every inch with electronic devices, and K9 units trained to detect human scent. Despite the exhaustive efforts, no further evidence was uncovered. As spring turned to summer, the mystery deepened. Local reporters covered the developments with sensitivity, highlighting the unresolved pain and ongoing search for answers. Some journalists questioned the resources allocated to the case, sparking public debate over law enforcement priorities. Behind the headlines, the people of Elmswood lived with a quiet, persistent fear. Parents told their children to avoid the forest alone. Hikers formed groups, sharing locations and check-in plans. The forest, once a beloved natural refuge, became a place of caution and whispered stories. Emily's disappearance also drew attention from true crime enthusiasts and amateur detectives from across the country. Online forums debated theories, some grounded in evidence, others speculative and wild. These digital communities offered support to the family, but also complicated the narrative with conflicting information. Sheriff Matthews occasionally monitored these forums, cautious but hopeful that tips might emerge. Some led to dead ends, others remained unverified. The case remained a puzzle with missing pieces. The emotional toll on the Harper family continued. Grace Harper organized community meetings, aiming to foster unity and healing. She spoke openly about the difficulty of living with uncertainty, but also about the strength found in solidarity. Michael Harper, despite his pain, began documenting his experience in a journal. He wrote about his memories of Emily, the search parties, and his hopes for the future. His words captured the raw reality of losing someone to the unknown. Meanwhile, the investigative team kept probing. They revisited old leads, conducted new interviews, and analyzed forensic evidence with the latest technology. But the forest's secrets remained elusive. Some community members called for a memorial to honor Emily and others who had vanished in the forest. Plans were made for a quiet, reflective space near the town center, a place where people could remember and find solace. The case of Emily Harper became a defining chapter in Elmswood's history. It shaped the community's relationship with the land, with each other, and with the fragility of life itself. As the sun set over the towering pines, the forest whispered its secrets in the wind. Emily Harper's story was far from over, suspended between hope and despair, memory and mystery. The following months brought little clarity, but the community of Elmswood refused to let Emily Harper's story fade into silence. Each day, the forest stood as a quiet sentinel, vast and indifferent, hiding its secrets beneath layers of moss and shadow. Yet beneath this stillness, the echoes of hope, grief and unanswered questions lingered like a haunting melody that refused to end. As summer approached its peak, investigators reviewed every detail of the case one last time before an anticipated cold season would slow search efforts once again. Sheriff John Matthews convened with his team, pressing them to reconsider angles, re-interview witnesses, and examine evidence anew with fresh eyes and the latest forensic technology. One breakthrough emerged from a forensic re-examination of the fragments found in the shallow stream, the broken necklace and the scrap of fabric. Advances in DNA technology allowed analysts to isolate minute skin cells from the fabric. After weeks of painstaking work, the results confirmed beyond doubt that the fibers belonged to Emily's jacket. But there was something else, traces of an unknown third party's DNA, distinct and unidentifiable in the existing criminal databases. This discovery rekindled both hope and fear. Someone had been with Emily during her last known days in the forest. But who? And what had happened between them? Sheriff Matthews expanded the inquiry beyond Elmswood, coordinating with state and federal agencies. They sifted through reports of similar disappearances, attempted assaults, and suspicious activity in neighboring counties. Community members, still holding vigil, found renewed urgency in organizing search parties. They combed through underbrush, scoured ravines, and followed every potential lead, no matter how small or improbable. Despite the decades-old forest's daunting complexity, volunteers approached the search with unwavering determination, knowing the value of each painstaking step. Among those volunteers was Rachel Mills, who had discovered the broken necklace. Haunted by the possibility of uncovering something vital, she dedicated herself to learning more about the forest's geography, wildlife patterns, and hidden paths that might have offered Emily refuge or entrapment. Rachel's intimate knowledge of the woods made her an invaluable guide for the search teams. She also began interviewing longtime residents, gathering whispered stories of the forest's darker corners and unexplained events that had long been buried beneath years of silence. One tale told by an elderly resident named Harold Green caught attention. He spoke of a dilapidated cabin deep in the forest, long abandoned and avoided by locals due to rumors of illicit activity decades before. According to Harold, the cabin was a place where travelers had disappeared or were never seen again. Investigators soon located the cabin's remains. Though mostly collapsed, remnants suggested it had been recently disturbed. However, no direct evidence linked it to Emily's disappearance. Still, the discovery added another layer to the forest's tangled history, and fueled speculation about hidden dangers lurking beneath the canopy. Meanwhile, the Harper family faced the unbearable challenge of living in limbo. Grace Harper, despite her anguish, channeled her energy into advocacy and support groups for families of missing persons. She became a fierce voice for awareness, pushing local authorities to maintain focus on cold cases and improve resources for searchers in wilderness areas. Her public appearances often ended with quiet moments of vulnerability, reflecting the raw pain beneath her steady composure. In interviews, she spoke of the torment of not knowing, describing it as a wound that never fully heals. Michael Harper, now nearing adulthood, continued to write in his journal. His entries became more introspective, delving into the impact of loss and the challenge of hope. Writing was his way to process grief and maintain connection to the sister who had vanished into the forest's depths. In private, he confided to close friends and counselors his fears, that the forest had swallowed Emily whole. Yet, he refused to give up on the possibility that she might still be alive, somewhere beyond the reach of search parties and the world's understanding. Public interest in the case waxed and waned. True crime podcasts and online forums kept Emily's story alive, sharing updates and theories with listeners across the country. While some discussions were respectful and supportive, others drifted into speculation and rumor, sometimes straining the family's privacy. Sheriff Matthews occasionally addressed the public, urging caution against unverified claims and emphasizing the importance of factual investigation. He remained committed to finding answers, even as time stretched on. One chilling twist came with an anonymous tip received by the sheriff's office nearly a year after Emily's disappearance. The caller claimed knowledge of a hidden network of trails and underground tunnels beneath the forest, allegedly used by criminal elements to evade law enforcement and traffic illegal goods. Although initially met with skepticism, investigators took the tip seriously. They commissioned a subterranean survey, using ground-penetrating radar and exploration teams to scan beneath the earth. The survey revealed faint indications of man-made tunnels, perhaps old mining shafts or secret pathways dating back decades. No direct link to Emily was found, but the revelation added to the forest's mystique, and the growing sense that much of its history remained untold. As the second anniversary of Emily's disappearance approached, the community of Elmswood gathered for a memorial service at the site of the town's planned reflective garden. Families, friends and neighbors assembled in the early evening light, carrying candles and photos of missing loved ones. Grace Harper spoke quietly but with resolve. "We come together not just to remember Emily, but to honor the courage of all those still searching for answers, for justice and for hope. Her story is a part of us, a reminder to never stop looking, never stop hoping." In the months that followed, life in Elmswood settled into a new rhythm, a fragile balance between remembrance and moving forward. The forest remained unchanged, vast and enigmatic, holding on to its secrets tightly. For those closest to Emily, the mystery was a constant shadow, woven into daily existence. Yet, despite the pain, they embraced moments of beauty and connection, reminding themselves that even in absence love endures. Sheriff Matthews continued his work, always mindful that some cases may never find closure, but in every unturned stone and whispered lid, he sought the truth. Because in the silence of the forest, in the echo of footsteps lost to time, he heard a promise that one day perhaps the story would be told. And so the tale of Emily Harper lingers, a haunting reminder of the unknown, the resilience of those left behind, and the thin line between hope and despair.
The vanishing of Josephine Wells. In the early spring of 1997, the small town of Millfield, Ohio, was waking slowly from its long winter slumber. The streets, lined with modest brick homes and towering oak trees, buzzed quietly with the rhythms of everyday life. School buses trundling down narrow lanes, neighbors greeting one another with warm smiles, and shopkeepers unlocking doors to begin another day. Josephine Wells was a familiar figure in Millfield. At 24 years old, she carried herself with a gentle confidence, the kind that made her a beloved barista at the local coffee shop and an avid participant in community theater. Her hazel eyes sparkled with curiosity, and her laughter could often be heard drifting across Main Street as she chatted with customers and friends. On March 10th, a Monday, Josephine's day began like any other. She arrived at the cafe early to prepare for the morning rush, humming softly as she arranged pastries and filled the coffee urns. Her co-workers noted her usual cheerful demeanor. No one could have predicted that by nightfall, Josephine Wells would vanish without a trace. That afternoon, Josephine mentioned to her close friend Emily Carter that she planned to visit the nearby Millfield Nature Preserve after work. It was a place she often went to clear her mind, a quiet retreat where she could wander among towering pines and listen to the soft rustling of leaves. She loved the solitude and the way the natural world seemed to hold its breath in peaceful stillness. "I'm going to take a walk," Josephine said with a smile, slipping on her coat. "I need to think. It's been a long week." Emily nodded, understanding. She watched Josephine leave through the cafe window, her silhouette blending with the shadows lengthening on the street. The evening grew colder as the sun dipped below the horizon. When Josephine did not return home by 9 p.m., her roommate Lisa Donovan grew concerned. She called Josephine's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Lisa checked with a few mutual friends who had not seen Josephine since that morning. Worry deepened into alarm. That night, the local police were contacted and a missing person report was filed. Sheriff Tom Reynolds took the case personally. He knew Josephine well, a bright, kind young woman whose disappearance shook the tight-knit town to its core. Early searches began the next morning, volunteers and law enforcement combing the nature preserve with flashlights and dogs trained to pick up human scents. Yet the woods yielded no sign of Josephine, no footprints, no belongings, no indication she had passed through. Days turned into weeks, flyers plastered on telephone poles, billboards along highways, and news broadcasts implored anyone with information to come forward. Still, the mystery deepened. Strangers arrived in town, drawn by media coverage and internet forums speculating on Josephine's fate. Rumors swirled. Had she run away? Was she the victim of foul play? Had she stumbled into the wilderness and gotten lost? Sheriff Reynolds, while cautious in public statements, privately worried about the last place Josephine was seen. The nature preserve was vast and known for its confusing labyrinth of trails and dense undergrowth. It was easy to become disoriented, especially as the days grew shorter and temperatures dropped. But the absence of any physical evidence puzzled him most. If Josephine had been injured or trapped, surely something, an article of clothing, a scrap of paper, a dropped shoe would have been found. One detail stood out. A witness, a jogger who passed through the preserve that afternoon, reported seeing a young woman matching Josephine's description near the edge of the forest. She appeared to be speaking on a cell phone, though the witness could not hear the conversation. The witness also mentioned a black pickup truck parked nearby, its driver watching the woman closely before driving off. This information sparked a new lead. Investigators canvassed local residents and businesses, but came up empty. The truck and driver remained unidentified. Meanwhile, Josephine's family struggled to hold on to hope. Her parents, James and Mary Wells, held vigils, their faces etched with grief and disbelief. Mary clung to Josephine's bedroom, the scent of her perfume still lingering on the curtains, the small wooden jewelry box on the dresser untouched. Friends and acquaintances offered their theories. Some believed Josephine had planned a sudden escape from the pressures of small-town life. Others suspected a darker truth. Perhaps someone had followed her to the forest, intent on harm. Sheriff Reynolds knew that every theory needed investigation. Officers revisited the preserve, checking for hidden trails, old hunting blinds, and places where someone could have concealed themselves. The deeper they searched, the more the forest seemed to resist answers. It held on to its secrets with a silence so profound it felt almost alive. Sheriff Reynolds met with a local historian, Martha Finch, who shared stories of the preserve's past, of vanished travelers, strange lights seen among the trees, and an old legend about the Watcher, a shadowy figure said to stalk the woods at night. Though he did not believe in ghosts, the sheriff could not dismiss how the tales captured the town's imagination, weaving fear and mystery into the fabric of the search. As weeks passed, the case of Josephine Wells became the town's haunting question, a puzzle with no edges, a story left unfinished. The trail went cold, but the resolve of those who loved her did not. They kept walking the paths, speaking her name into the wind, hoping that somewhere, somehow, Josephine might still be found. The early weeks of spring gave way to a reluctant summer in Millfield, Ohio. The days lengthened and the woods around the nature preserve grew lush with new life. Yet for those waiting, hoping for news of Josephine Wells, time felt heavier, slower, as if each sunrise carried a weight of unanswered questions. Sheriff Tom Reynolds sat quietly in his office late one evening, poring over case files that had multiplied like shadows. Photographs of Josephine, fresh and smiling, pinned alongside maps of the preserve. Notes from interviews with witnesses, all carefully cross-referenced. Yet despite the growing volume of material, the mystery deepened. Josephine's disappearance had become more than a missing person case. It had become a riddle wrapped in silence. In the days after the initial search, law enforcement focused on the report of the black pickup truck seen near the nature preserve. The driver's presence, watching Josephine closely before speeding away, seemed to suggest someone had been observing her, possibly stalking. Yet no similar vehicles were reported in the area around that time. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed no sign of such a truck. Local residents could recall no unusual activity. The community began whispering about the stranger, a vague, unsettling figure who might hold the key to Josephine's fate. Sheriff Reynolds personally visited the gas station clerk, a middle-aged man named Howard Mills, who worked the night shift. Howard remembered the night well, the quiet routine hours broken only by a few regular customers. "I didn't see any black pickups." "No," Howard said slowly. "But I did notice a man, older, maybe late 40s, in a faded leather jacket. He bought a bottle of water and left quick. Didn't seem like he was from around here." The description was vague, but it added another thread to the tangled web. Meanwhile, Josephine's family had returned to the nature preserve in an effort to find some trace of their daughter themselves. Her mother, Mary, who had once been a nurse, led small groups through the dense forest, searching areas overlooked in the official search. On one of those walks, Mary found a small weathered notebook partially buried beneath the leaves. The cover was torn, and inside were faint pencil sketches of the forest, twisted trees, narrow paths, strange symbols. Mary brought it to Sheriff Reynolds, who was intrigued but cautious. The notebook did not belong to Josephine, or so the sheriff believed. Its pages seemed older, written in a shaky hand, a journal of someone who had spent long hours in the woods, observing and recording. Among the sketches was a crudely drawn map marking an area deep within the preserve labeled only as the Hollow. Curiosity grew. The Hollow was not a place known to the general public, an area avoided by locals, steeped in whispered warnings about strange occurrences and disappearances over the years. Sheriff Reynolds authorized a small team to explore the Hollow. As they trekked through thick underbrush and uneven terrain, the forest seemed to close around them. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. At the heart of the Hollow, they found an old rusted metal box partially buried beneath moss and soil. Inside were fragments of old newspapers dating back decades, a collection of hand-carved wooden figurines, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The letters were written in a delicate script, addressed to no one, filled with ramblings about watchers in the trees and voices on the wind. Back in town, the atmosphere had shifted. The discovery of the Hollow and the cryptic notebook fueled speculation and fear. Some townspeople believed Josephine's disappearance was connected to an ancient presence in the woods, a supernatural force or a hidden cult. Others dismissed these stories as folklore, refusing to let fear cloud their hope for a safe return. Josephine's closest friends began to organize candlelight vigils at the edge of the nature preserve. They shared memories of her kindness, her laughter, and the dreams she had. Emily Carter, her friend from the cafe, spoke softly one evening as flames flickered in the cool night air. Josephine believed the world was full of stories waiting to be told. Emily said, "She loved the quiet places where you could hear your own heart. I want to believe she's out there somewhere, listening." The sheriff, grounded in pragmatism, continued to sift through leads. One day, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A local man named Harold Jenkins, known for his solitary lifestyle and reputation as a recluse, contacted the police. He claimed to have seen Josephine the night she disappeared. Harold's account was unsettling. He said he had been walking his dog near the Hollow when he noticed a young woman sitting on a fallen log, staring intently at the forest floor. She looked lost, maybe scared. Harold recounted, "When I called out, she didn't answer. She seemed frozen, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear." Harold described a quiet presence in the woods, a sensation of being watched, though he saw no one else. Sheriff Reynolds was skeptical, but respected the man's honesty. A search of the area Harold described yielded nothing new. No footprints, no personal belongings. The forest seemed determined to guard its secrets. As weeks passed, the emotional toll on Josephine's family became increasingly apparent. Her father, James Wells, who had always been the pillar of strength, began withdrawing into silence. Mary found solace in the support of close friends and counselors, but wrestled daily with the uncertainty. "It's like a shadow has fallen over our lives," she confided in a rare interview with a local journalist. "We live between hope and despair, never knowing which will come next." The police kept the case open, but the trail had gone cold. In the absence of new evidence, some theories took hold. Had Josephine been abducted by a stranger? Could she have gotten lost and succumbed to the elements? Or was there a darker truth, buried somewhere in the labyrinth of trees, waiting to be uncovered? The town of Millfield continued its quiet rhythms, the nature preserve a place of beauty and mystery. For those who loved Josephine Wells, each day was a prayer for answers, a search for meaning in the silence left behind. And for the forest itself, the story of the young woman who disappeared within its shadows remained one more secret whispered among the leaves. Months had passed since Josephine Wells vanished into the depths of the Millfield Nature Preserve. The initial urgency of the search had given way to a somber routine of unanswered questions and quiet grief. Yet beneath the surface of the town's outward calm, the mystery continued to haunt. Sheriff Tom Reynolds sat at his desk early one autumn morning, staring at a folder thick with notes, photos, and witness statements. The case was still open, but the path to answers seemed as tangled as the forest itself. A new lead had arrived unexpectedly. An anonymous tipster, writing in careful, deliberate handwriting, had mailed a letter to the sheriff's office. The letter claimed knowledge of what truly happened to Josephine Wells. Sheriff Reynolds hesitated before opening it, a mix of hope and caution rising inside him. The note read, "Look to the water, where the trees bend low, and the sun seldom shines, secrets hide beneath the surface." Josephine saw something she shouldn't have. Find the old bridge. The letter was unsigned, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. The old bridge was a known landmark within the nature preserve, a rickety wooden structure, spanning a small murky creek that twisted like a serpent through the forest floor. Intrigued, Reynolds organized a small team to revisit the area. The bridge itself was weathered and unstable, overgrown with moss and ivy, its wooden planks creaking underfoot. Below, the water flowed slowly, dark and reflective, the shadows of branches dancing across its surface. The team carefully searched the creek bed and its banks, using flashlights and tools to sift through debris. Hours passed with no discovery, until a sharp glint caught the eye of one officer. Nestled among the fallen leaves was a small silver locket, tarnished but intact. Inside, a faded photograph of Josephine smiled back, her eyes bright and full of life. The discovery sent a ripple of renewed hope through the investigative team and Josephine's family. How had the locket ended up there? Had Josephine dropped it during her last moments in the forest, or had someone placed it deliberately? The sheriff's team collected the locket as evidence and sent it for forensic analysis, hoping it might yield fingerprints or DNA. While waiting for the lab results, Sheriff Reynolds met with Mary and James Wells to share the news. Mary held the locket gently, tears streaming silently down her face. "It's like a part of her has come back to us," she whispered. "But why here? What was she doing by the old bridge?" The investigation expanded to include more detailed mapping of the area around the bridge. Using aerial photographs and LiDAR scans, the team uncovered a series of faint trails weaving through the dense trees, some barely visible beneath the undergrowth. One trail in particular seemed to lead deeper into a secluded part of the forest where few ventured. Sheriff Reynolds recalled the cryptic references in the mysterious notebook found weeks earlier, the hollow and strange symbols that seemed to mark specific locations. He assembled a team with expertise in wilderness navigation and local history, determined to explore these hidden paths. The small group moved cautiously through the underbrush, guided by the faint trail. The forest here felt different, quieter, as if holding its breath.
Branches scraped against jackets, leaves whispered with each step, and the scent of pine mixed with damp earth filled the air. After nearly an hour, they arrived at a small clearing. At its center stood a circle of ancient stones, weathered by time and moss-covered. This was a place long forgotten, a relic from a past generation that had once held meaning to the people who lived here. One of the team members, a local historian named Ellen Marks, explained that such stone circles were often used by indigenous tribes for ceremonies, or as markers for sacred ground. Though no direct evidence linked this site to Josephine, its existence deep in the forest raised questions about what had drawn her so far off the beaten path. As they examined the stones, Ellen noticed something unusual, a small carved symbol etched into one of the rocks, matching the designs in the old notebook. The symbol was a twisting spiral, its meaning lost to time but clearly significant. Inspired, the team began to search the surrounding area more thoroughly. Beneath a thin layer of leaves, they uncovered fragments of burned wood, evidence of a fire pit used recently. Nearby, flattened grass and signs of human presence hinted that someone had been here not long before. Back at the sheriff's office, the forensic lab reported the results from the locket. No usable fingerprints were found, but traces of DNA on its clasp did not match Josephine's or any known persons in the database. The implication was chilling. Someone else had handled the locket, potentially the person responsible for her disappearance. Sheriff Reynolds pondered the implications late into the night. The idea that Josephine had been watching or following someone, or that someone had been watching her, took on new weight. Had she stumbled upon something forbidden in the forest? Something that led to her being silenced? As the weeks passed, the town of Millfield remained gripped by the mystery. The forest, once a place of quiet beauty, had become a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that even in familiar places, darkness could lurk just beyond the light. Mary Wells continued to visit the nature preserve daily, often lingering near the old bridge. She would speak softly to the wind, hoping her words might reach her daughter wherever she was. "I know you're out there," she would say. "I'll keep looking. I won't stop." One afternoon, a breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. A local man named Peter Grayson came forward with information about a stranger he had seen near the nature preserve months before Josephine's disappearance. Peter described a man matching the description of the driver of the black pickup truck, seen watching Josephine before she vanished. The stranger was a drifter who had recently arrived in the area, known to camp deep in the woods. Peter had seen him several times near the hollow, the stone circle, and the old bridge. Sheriff Reynolds sent officers to investigate the campsites, finding remnants of recent habitation, tents, discarded food wrappers, and a journal filled with cryptic entries. The journal contained ramblings about voices in the trees, watchers and warnings to stay away from the girl who sees. It was unsettling, a window into the mind of someone disturbed, perhaps dangerous. The sheriff's department intensified their search for the man, but he seemed to vanish into the wilderness, leaving behind only questions. Had Josephine encountered him? Was he connected to her disappearance? As autumn deepened, the forest changed, shedding its vibrant greens for rust and gold. The chill in the air reminded the town that winter was coming, and with it, the hope of discovery grew colder. Yet the story of Josephine Wells remained alive in the hearts of those who refused to forget. The locket, the stone circle, the cryptic notebook, each clue a piece of a puzzle that had yet to reveal its full picture. In the stillness of the forest, the trees whispered their secrets, waiting for someone to listen, and somewhere perhaps Josephine waited too. The arrival of winter brought a stillness over Millfield and its surrounding forest that felt both peaceful and foreboding. Snow blanketed the ground, softening footsteps and muffling sounds, turning the sprawling landscape into a silent world of white. Yet beneath that calm exterior, the unresolved mystery of Josephine Wells gnawed at the town's collective conscience. Sheriff Tom Reynolds sat in his office, on a cold December morning, the pale light from the frosted window casting long shadows across his desk. The investigation had stretched over many months, evolving from frantic search efforts to a patient, methodical pursuit of answers. Every clue uncovered had led to more questions, and the specter of Josephine's disappearance remained a heavy weight on his shoulders. Since the discovery of the locket by the old bridge, the team had pursued every lead with renewed vigor. The forensic analysis had confirmed the presence of DNA belonging to an unknown individual on the locket's clasp, but no matches had been found in national databases. The anonymous letter that directed the sheriff to the old bridge had sparked hope and suspicion in equal measure. Who had sent it, and why? Was it the work of someone seeking justice, or a cruel trick designed to prolong the agony? The mysterious stranger described by Peter Grayson remained elusive. Despite extensive patrols and searches in the dense forest, no trace of the man had been found. The camp that officers discovered was abandoned, save for a journal filled with disjointed ramblings about shadows, voices in the trees, and warnings to stay away from the girl who sees. The entries suggested a fragile mind, perhaps unhinged by something witnessed or experienced deep within the forest. Sheriff Reynolds had also revisited the stone circle known as the Hollow, the place where the spiral symbol from the notebook had been found carved into one of the ancient stones. The site had become a focal point for investigators and locals alike. Ellen Marks, the local historian, had returned several times to study the carvings and the circle's layout. She believed it might have been a sacred site used by Native American tribes centuries ago, possibly as a place of ritual or spiritual significance. What no one had expected was the appearance of an old map in the Millfield Historical Society's archives, discovered by Ellen during a routine search of donated materials. The map dated back over 100 years and detailed the nature preserve area, marking several locations with strange symbols similar to those found in Josephine's notebook and the stone circle. One symbol, in particular, was marked near a section of the forest called Raven's Hollow, a remote, nearly inaccessible area known for its steep ravines and dense thickets. Raven's Hollow had long been a place of whispered stories among the townspeople, tales of strange lights, eerie sounds and disappearances dating back decades. It was a place people avoided, especially after dusk. Sheriff Reynolds decided it was time to send a specialized team into Raven's Hollow to investigate. He selected officers trained in wilderness survival, forensic search techniques, and archaeological excavation to carefully explore the area. The team set out early one frosty morning, equipped with GPS devices, cameras, and evidence collection tools. The path to Raven's Hollow was difficult, the ground uneven and slippery with frozen leaves. Tall trees closed in around them, blocking much of the pale winter sunlight, and casting the forest floor into deep shadows. As they navigated through the thickets, the air grew colder, and an unsettling silence surrounded them. After hours of careful searching, the team came upon a series of shallow depressions in the ground. At first glance, they appeared to be natural formations, but further examination revealed faint signs of disturbance, as if the earth had been dug up recently, and then covered again. Nearby, broken branches and trampled undergrowth suggested someone had passed through recently. As they pressed further into the hollow, one officer's boot caught on something hard beneath a thin layer of snow and leaves. Kneeling down, she brushed away the debris to reveal the corner of a weathered wooden box. With great care, the team pried the box free and brought it back to the surface. Inside the box were several personal items, a small silver cross, a faded photograph of Josephine with her parents, and a collection of letters tied together with a red ribbon. The letters were brittle and yellowed with age, but the handwriting was unmistakably Josephine's. Reading through the letters, the team uncovered a hidden side of Josephine's life, one that painted a picture far different from the cheerful teenager the town knew. The letters revealed that she had been struggling with something she called the shadows, cryptic references to a presence she felt watching her in the forest. She spoke of secret meetings at the hollow, of someone who had promised to help her but who also scared her deeply. One letter in particular stood out. Written just days before her disappearance, Josephine described meeting a man named Elias, who had told her of an ancient secret hidden in the forest, a secret that could change everything if revealed. She expressed fear and confusion, but also a determination to find the truth. The discovery of the box and letters reinvigorated the investigation. Sheriff Reynolds called in experts in folklore and anthropology to help interpret Josephine's references and to better understand the significance of the hollow and the symbol. One expert, Dr. Amelia Green, suggested that Josephine had uncovered something far beyond a simple missing person case, a layered mystery involving local history, ancient rituals, and perhaps people willing to kill to protect those secrets. Meanwhile, the DNA on the locket remained a mystery, with no matches in the databases. Some speculated the stranger might be someone who had never been arrested or recorded, perhaps a drifter or an outsider. Sheriff Reynolds coordinated with neighboring jurisdictions, and even federal agencies, hoping to find a match or new leads. In the town, Josephine's parents struggled with the renewed hope and the pain of unanswered questions. Mary often visited the edge of Raven's Hollow, holding the locket close and speaking softly to the forest. James spent nights poring over the letters, trying to piece together what Josephine had been involved in, and who Elias might have been. The months stretched on, and while no definitive answers emerged, the case took on a life of its own, a haunting tale whispered around campfires and in hushed conversations. The forest had swallowed Josephine Welks, but her story remained etched into the land itself, in the stones, the trees, and the shadows between. Sheriff Reynolds knew that some mysteries resist closure, that some secrets lie buried forever beneath layers of time and silence. Yet he vowed to keep searching, for Josephine, for her family, and for the truth that had slipped beyond reach but not beyond hope. In the quiet of Millfield's winter nights, the wind through the trees seemed to carry her voice, a soft whisper urging those who listened to remember, to seek, and to never give up.